everyone, welcome to Watch It Painting. In this video we're going to be painting the Gorgomination from Zombicide Green Horde by Simon Games. Now I say we, that's pretty loose, I say that quite a lot, but this time we've got a special guest appearance. The painter is going to be Heroes and Bosses. He's another YouTube painter. If you've not seen his work, I will leave a link in the description below. You can go and check out his channel. I'm very impressed with how he paints. I really enjoy his tutorials, and I asked him to make an appearance here so you guys can see in case you've never seen him before. So please do leave him a thumbs up if you enjoyed the tutorial. Better yet, leave us a comment. Would you like to see more collaboration? Would you like to see him work on the channel more often? I'd like to get the best painters on YouTube all working together more so we can have like a go-to place for content that people can find and grow a channel massively easily, similar to the Dice Tower. Anyway, I'll hand it over now to Heroes and Bosses.
Hey guys, and thank you Ben for inviting me to hang out on your channel. So as Ben said, I'll be painting the Gorgomination, and this guy has a lot of mold lines and one big gap along the right leg. There's lots of materials out there for filling gaps in models, but I'm going to quickly show you my preferred way, and that's using plain old green stuff. So first squish the green stuff into a ball, then get your fingers wet. Now who would have thought that making worms out of Play-Doh would one day be a useful skill, but that's exactly what I'm doing. Next, take your strand of green stuff and tuck it into the start of the gap, and then just cram it in there. It doesn't have to look pretty, just make sure it's sticking in place. I've dipped my putty tool in water as well, so the green stuff isn't sticking to it. Once you get to the end of the gap, just cut off the excess. The last step is to just get your fingertip wet and press the green stuff completely flat against the model. The good thing about this kind of gap filler is that it doesn't shrink when it dries, unlike liquid green stuff and Vallejo's plastic putty. Now for the next step, you're going to need two colors of primer, a bright and a dark. I'm using Chaos Black and Korox White. The first thing I do is prime the miniature from below at a 45-degree angle with the black, and then from above at 45 degrees with the white. That's going to create this kind of effect, and it's also going to be our guide for highlighting. And you don't need black and white for this, just a brighter and a darker color. So I'm going to be painting this basically backwards from what many painters do. I'm going to start with the highlights and then end with the wash. I don't usually do this, but it works well when a miniature has all its features just merging together with no clear boundaries. So the first thing I'm doing is picking two different colors for the scales, and I'm going with Death World Forest and Elysian Green. I'm also going to mix a tone from equal parts of each. Now, using the two-color prime, I'm going to paint all of the white areas that are scales using Elysian Green. This is basically color by number now, just filling in all the white areas with the green. On the back, there's several rows of spiky scales sticking out. This is the only spot I use the midway color. I painted the top two rows with Elysian Green, then the third row with the middle tone. The rest of the rows I painted with the dark green. I'm also painting the underside of all the scales with a dark green color, and for the rest of the miniature, I'm just switching back and forth between the light and the dark. In places where the two colors meet, I'm not worried about there being an obvious line between them. I'm going to blend these together later. It's hard to see on camera, but if I angle this right, you should be able to see where the light and dark greens are. So now I'm going to do the exact same thing for the flesh using two shades of brown, and for these I've chosen Talarn Sand and XV88. So here on the abdomen you can see half is dark and half is light, and the same on the back of the left leg. The calf is light and the hamstring area up is dark. So starting off with light brown, I'm going to paint the light half of the abdomen. I'm giving the brush a quick rinse and switching to the darker brown. So So now I'm just going to repeat that for the remaining areas on the Mini, which is mostly the back of the legs, under the tentacles, and under the tail. After giving the Mini plenty of time to dry, it's time to blend together the light and darks to get rid of those harsh transitions between them. So starting off, I'm taking the Elysian green and watering it down a lot until it's basically a heavy wash or a glaze consistency. Then starting partway on the dark green, I'm going to brush towards the light green. It's important that you always brush towards the color that's on your brush. Even after one layer, you get a pretty decent transition between the colors. I usually go with 2 layers, but I'm also using a wash later, which is going to help a lot as well. Next, I'm taking some of the Death World Forest and doing the same thing. Water it down, and this time I'm using it in the few places where the dark green meets the dark brown, and this is mostly on the legs. And finally, I'm using some watered down tall iron sand on the abdomen to blend together where it meets the XV88. Next, I'm going to paint the inside of the mouth, and for this I'm using about a 2-to-1 mix of Cardic Flesh and Screamer Pink. I'm also painting just around the rim of the mouth and painting in a gum line as well. Next up are the horns, and I want these to change from light brown at the base to dark brown at the tips. So I'm using 2 colors, Rhinox Hide and Steel Legion Drab, and I'm mixing a 3rd color from equal amounts of each. The first thing I'm doing is painting all of the horns completely with Steel Legion Drab. While that paint is still wet, I'm painting the top 2/3 of each horn with the 50-50 mix. And then finally I'll paint the top 1/3 with pure Rhinox Hide. Now due to the ridges on the horns, we're going to have to wet blend these colors together. Just get a tiny amount of the lightest color and smudge it on the line where the 2 colors meet. If you go too far, wipe off your brush, grab a bit of the darker color and do the same thing. This doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, since the wash is going to help blend this as well. It has some spikes coming out the top of its tail, and I'm painting these using pure Rhinox Hide. I'm also going to paint the spikes coming out the top of each heel using the same color. For the teeth, I'm using Vallejo's Ivory. The teeth aren't well defined, but you can see a small ridge inside the mouth that represents the teeth. Once that's done, I'm using Screaming Skull to paint all the claws on the feet. And this is the last of the base colors. Next up are the washes, and I'll be using 4 different colored washes. Right now I've got Athonian Camo Shade and Agrax Earth Shade in this palette. I'm starting off with the Athonian Camo Shade, and I'm using this on all the green areas of the Demogorgon. It's fine if some of this gets into the brown areas because I'll be applying the Agrax while this wash is still wet. Now I'm adding the Agrax Earth Shade to the brown regions, and some of the green regions aren't completely covered yet, but that is fine, as long as I make sure I cover everything before the wash dries. If not, it's going to create tide marks when you try to add more wash later. Okay, I'm letting that first round of wash dry before I do any more, and here's how the mini's looking so far. Next, I'm going to add Reikland Flesh Shade to the inside of the mouth and all around the edge of the mouth. I'm making sure that there are heavy pools at the back of the mouth and on the sides of the tongue. And the final wash is Seraphim Sepia, and I'm using this on the teeth and the claws. At this point, all of our colors should be blended pretty harmoniously. I'm using the original colors on the teeth and claws as a highlight, and you certainly could do additional highlights on the rest of the mini, but I'm going to leave them as is. The initial use of light and dark has already created some good contrast, so next I'm going to start the base. The base is going to be painted with a simple flagstone pattern. To start this off, I'm covering the entire thing with Mechanicus Standard Grey. Next I'm drawing on some basic rectangular shapes using Abaddon Black. After that, I'm going to use a variety of grey colors to paint random flagstones to make it more interesting looking. And finally, I'm just using a dark grey to paint all around the rim. Once it dries completely, I'm spraying the whole thing with a matte varnish. So there's a problem with this mini that I didn't notice until I tried to photograph it. The slightest touch will knock it over because its center of gravity is way over the edge of the base. There's a couple things that can be done to fix this, and one is with a custom base. That's going to add some weight to the base and help keep it from tipping. I normally do a custom base anyhow, but this guy really needs one. So these are special basing rocks that I got from the end of my driveway. I've decided to make the flagstone a path instead of a floor, and I'm going to position rocks and dirt on either side of it. So once I found a few that were the right size and deciding where I'm going to put them, I'm using some earth texture as my glue. As I said before, this mini has already been sprayed with a matte varnish, but that won't affect how well the earth texture will stick. So I'm getting this on good and thick so the rocks can sink into it, and then I'll put some more mud around the edges to make it look more natural. Once the mud has dried and hardened, I'm going to paint the rocks. For this I'm using a 2-to-1 mix of Mechanicus Standard Grey and Stegodon Scale Green. I'm following this up with 2 layers of dry brushing. The first one is going to be a 1-to-1 mix of Celestra Grey and Mechanicus Standard Grey. The final dry brush for the rocks is going to be pure Celestra Grey. For this one, I'm just looking for all the edges that were picked out by the first dry brush, and I'm aiming for those. This is just going to make them stand out a bit better. Next, I'm using Steel Legion Drab to dry brush all the mud texture. This is going to be a fairly heavy dry brush, and I'm aiming to cover most of the mud with it. And finally, I'm using Xandri Dust as the final dry brush on the mud, going a lot lighter with this one. The dirt and rocks need a bit more pizzazz, so I'm going to add a small amount of flock. First, I've mixed some regular PVA glue with a bit of water to improve flow, and I'm going to put it randomly around the base of the rocks. This stuff is called Summer Blend from Gale Force 9. It looks like short turfy grass or moss. I'm just getting a big pile on there and tapping it off. And to finish this off, I'm just going to touch up the rim of the base with some of that same dark grey, and then give the Mini a quick spray with a matte varnish. Now the rocks have done a really good job of balancing this Mini on the base. It does not tip over anymore, but I'm going to do one more thing to really hold it down. This is a stainless steel washer, and I'm just going to super glue it to the bottom of the base. I did have to trim away the numbers a bit with my X-Acto knife, but that only takes a minute. This is something a lot of people do just to give any miniature a bit of weight and make it harder to knock over. And here's the finished product, the Gorgomination from Green Horde, also known as the Demogorgon from Dungeons & Dragons. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and a special thank you to all my patrons, and also to Ben and the other painters over at Watch It Painted. This is Mike from Heroes and Bosses, and thank you all for watching.